So Alexander Usyk versus Tyson Fury isn't too far away. It is literally just less than a month away now. Is that fair to say, less than a month? No, just a little over a month. Anyways, just got done doing a 12-round session. Boxing, of course, no kicking, no grappling or anything like that, just straight punches and Queensberry rules at that. So I thought it was good to get those rounds in, primarily because if you're going to cover boxing, if you're going to cover MMA, you have to do all these sports. Now, if you cover MMA, it is mandatory that you literally train almost all the sports that are involved, or maybe train at least one grappling, one striking, and one particular ground game, whether that would be judo or jiu-jitsu, or some of those are a little more mandatory than the others. But when it comes to boxing, let me tell you, it is a sport in and of itself that is complicated to try to figure out, simple to look at, but in reality, within its complexes, has all these different sciences that constantly evolve as the fight goes on. That is my observation from boxing. Now, it's not to say that mixed martial arts is not a technical and scientific sport. In fact, it's probably even more complicated. But what's even more complicated with that is that with MMA, yes, it can be a sport that, let's say, has its difficulties, has its technicalities, and everything that comes with its complexities. However, it can also be a sport that is won by sheer pure luck, as opposed to, let's say, wrestling or boxing. I'm going to tell you right now, these are two sports where there is no luck involved. And sometimes there is, however, the dynamic of, let's say, one's attributes more superior to the other that really changes the course of the fight. Okay, now, what do I mean by that? What did I just say earlier about wrestling? In wrestling, the guy that is always skilled, the guy that is always going to be the A side. In other words, if you're taking on somebody like Kyle Dake, Jordan Burroughs, or Sajulayev, the Dagestani gold medalist wrestler, you're not going to get any lucky pins or lucky points on them. In fact, it's virtually impossible, because the way that the sport is built is that it requires you to constantly grind. It requires you to constantly learn new skills. Whereas in boxing, it's sort of like MMA in a way. The way that they made boxing look out to be is it is as if the guy that is, let's say, the more skilled guy, or at least supposedly the more skilled guy, there's no way he's going to lose to somebody like, let's say, I don't know, Francis Ngannou. Lo and behold, what happened with Tyson Fury? He almost lost to Francis Ngannou in the eyes of many boxing pugilists, and, of course, MMA fans and enthusiasts alike. Because if you're an MMA guy, why would you not want to see one of your own fellow brothers of combat get in there with the best boxer in the world and not only give a good account of himself, but also straight up dominate him, maybe not on the judges' scorecards, but in the scorecards of many people out there and the opinions and sentiments of those that were observing it. So this is important to understand. Now, what are some things that I can break down about Alexander Usyk and Tyson Fury? Because this is a very important matchup to break down with the kicks and the punches. But just like what I did with the early predictions for Canelo versus David Benavidez, I urge you guys to take a look at that on the video section below. I talked about the psychology before the actual matchup. The difference is Canelo versus David Benavidez may not really happen. Whereas with Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk, it's literally just a couple of weeks away. You have Sean Strickland taking on Dricus du Plessis in mid-January, or late January, should I say. And then you have UFC cards in mid-January, starting off with some fight nights at the Apex. And then you have, on the same day as Alexander Usyk and Tyson Fury, Volkanovski taking on Ilya Topuria on the same day. I had to pause for a second to think about that because I realized that, well, you're going to have a doubleheader that day. At least within a split second, I thought there might have been a conflict of time. Because obviously, the Alexander Usyk and Tyson Fury card are a Saudi Arabian time slot, which is going to be in prime time in the Middle East, in Riyadh, which obviously is great for the European audience. And then the UFC is going to have their fight in the mid-afternoon. So it's just business as usual with a double matinee of combat sports. That's the beauty about it. But let's analyze the psychology of Alexander Usyk and Tyson Fury. By the way, on the 6-minute mark of this particular content, I'm going to start talking about the psychology of Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk. And that's going to take place in 5 seconds from now because it's very important to break this down. So here it goes. For one, you have somebody like Alexander Usyk, who is coming off of a war-torn nation. And then here comes the boisterous, flamboyant, very loud, and very sometimes obnoxious Tyson Fury getting in his face with Alexander Usyk just looking straight at him, saying to himself, you know what? I'm not afraid of you. I can just sit here and smile based on the fact that, hey, you know what? I can take you on. I've been in war in my country. I've seen some of my brethren pass away. I've seen some family members get abducted. I've seen some of the worst things that human atrocity can offer. So what is it that you're going to do as Tyson Fury against me? Well, with Tyson Fury, what he has going on is his sheer obvious attributes, which is his size, his length, which can cause serious problems for Alexander Usyk. Why? Well, for the simple fact that Alexander Usyk is a smaller man. He fights in a heavyweight division. He's known for having great footwork. But has anybody ever noticed that he doesn't really use it as often? Look at the Derek Chisora fight. Look at the Witherspoon fight. There wasn't a lot of movement in the way that he used against Gassiev and in the other cruiserweights that he's dominated as he was undisputed champion of that weight class, now coming into the heavyweight division as none other than the unified champion. So when it comes to belts, it seems that he's the A side, but when it comes to notoriety, Tyson Fury got that going on. He is the guy that has the Netflix series, even though you could say that Alexander Usyk has a very interesting story, something that Hollywood could get behind. The problem is Alexander Usyk doesn't have that charisma. Because in Hollywood, if you were to play somebody like Alexander Usyk, you would require to need a person that has captivating, emotive personality in order for you to pay attention to this particular movie about a guy that's coming from a war-torn country, and by the way, who is also a world champion boxer. Follow me here. I'm talking about if, let's say, Hollywood was to create an Alexander Usyk movie. A lot of things would be sensationalized, just like most war movies. They often exaggerate based on the true events in order to garner a higher attention span from a crowd that, well, is just not going to take, let's say, an espionage or military movie that deals with a lot of mundane moments. Which, by the way, if you are at war as a soldier, as an intel officer, or any of those in between, you are really dealing with a lot of mundane and boring tasks that is repetitive, and not only that, really just long and drawn out that can't be attractive to the screen of those that are trying to watch a movie about a man that comes from a war-torn nation. So what you have with Alexander Usyk is the same thing in his boxing style. It's not very erratic. In fact, it's very technical, very crisp, but at the same time, I think it will lend itself to becoming a lot more, how do I say this, very hesitant, very reluctant to throw his shots, because when you're dealing with somebody like Tyson Fury, who is taller and longer, he's going to make you pay. And on top of that, he knows how to fight as a counterpuncher. He also knows how to fight in the inside in which I think he's really going to use stuffing, and not only that, really smothering Alexander Usyk almost in a wrestling type of affair, which, by the way, many people don't understand. If they want to, in boxing, you can really implement a lot of wrestling. And many people don't know that, because the majority of what they see in boxing highlights deals with guys that are jabbing each other away, either throwing hard combinations that is highlight worthy for you to even look at and put in, let's say, a 2-minute clip of some sort. So, again, this right here is not always going to be the case in this particular matchup. It's not. You're going to see a lot of mundane, a lot of boring, a lot of strategical affairs. But the way that Tyson Fury is going to go about this, because, by the way, this is more than just a technical aspect of it. I really didn't want to make this a technical aspect of the video, but I couldn't help it. I really just wanted to make this about the psychological aspect of these two men before they go into the fight. But nonetheless, there it is. That's the technical aspect of it that I had just mentioned. But importantly, the psychological part about it is that Tyson Fury absolutely wants to remind Alexander Usyk that he is the smaller man. And how do you do that? Well, you do that by as he's looking up at Tyson Fury, he's looking down on Alexander Usyk. Now, I don't know about you. If you've ever took on tall opponents in any combat sports, I'm telling you, it is very intimidating. Even in wrestling, I've had some of the tallest guys that I've wrestled in my middle school days. And then, of course, as I got into high school, it started to get a little bit even with the height discrepancy and whatnot. But I do remember in my middle school days wrestling, I've had a lot of really tall opponents from the opposite side, from my opponents and whatnot. And I remember the difficulties that I had mentally to get over that, because I'm thinking to myself, my goodness, how am I going to shoot in on this guy? How am I going to be able to grab his leg? How will he use his height against me in relationship to the strength factor that he could use to, let's say, neutralize me in any kind of way that is, let's say, a leverage for his particular attributes? This is something you're really going to think about as a smaller man. Now, as I got older and I got into different combat sports, and I started sparring guys as tall as 6'7", 6'8", 6'5", 6'4", I started realizing and understanding how to deal with this particular height discrepancy. And this is very important to understand in the Alexander Usyk aspect, is because of this. Alexander Usyk now understands that he has a skill. Can he use it? Can he implement it? Because if he can, then he can continue that psychological edge that he will have over Tyson Fury. If not, then he is just going to continue in this mental barrage of constantly doubting himself. Because of the height discrepancy, because of the fact that we know Tyson Fury can fight in the inside, because of the fact that Tyson Fury can also, if he chooses to, fight in that very elusive style that Alexander Usyk is also very good at. The problem with Alexander Usyk's style and the way he's going to approach this fight, the way that he's always been approaching fights, is that, at least in the heavyweight division, the way he's been approaching fights was that he wasn't using a lot of his footwork the way that we've seen in the cruiserweight division. And by the way, that matters. If he can use that, he can really put a mental strain on Tyson Fury. Because now, if you're elusive, you're not going to get trapped into a corner. You're not going to, let's say, get caught up in the ropes. You're going to use angles to get out of it. You're going to use clinches to break away and then continue to circle and dance around Tyson Fury and then throw your jabs and implement your game plan in a very technical, methodical manner. But the problem is, Tyson Fury can also do that, which tells you that the psychological edge to this game is very important. Now, with these two men, Do they have an aspect of machismo, trying to prove something? And I'm going to tell you why this is important. Because when they start swinging and they start forgetting to throw straight shots, and instead they're throwing looping shots, they're throwing hooks, and they're throwing uppercuts, one is going to get hit really hard, and then one is going to have to respond by either backing up or following to their obligement of continuing this brawl. And that remains to be seen. But I got to tell you, out of those two guys, I got to say that Alexander Usyk seems to be the more stoic man out of those two. And what do I mean by stoic? I mean that the man who is willing to, let's say, keep up with the game plan in the entire fight, as opposed to setting off course based on a temperament issue that they had because maybe they were upset at maybe a low blow, or maybe they were upset at the fact that they were, let's say, knocked down, or they were hurt, and now they have to prove that they have to hurt the other guy. Because here's the thing about boxing that I think is really important to point out. You don't need to necessarily hurt the other guy in order to win. I've seen boxing matches that went 12 rounds where the other guy was able to hurt the other guy, and based on those small moments alone, they wanted to give the fight to the other guy. We've seen that in MMA. A clear example of that is when Leon Edwards fought Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz was getting dominated that whole entire fight, getting picked apart by Leon Edwards, and then in the fifth and final round, he goes and he smashes him with one shot that made Leon Edwards do the stinky leg. Now all of a sudden, after he made the stinky leg, now you want to give the fight to Nate Diaz? But that's the reality of it, right? Those things can happen. Either way, Leon Edwards, just like what I'm talking about with this particular example, he stayed on course. He didn't allow those final moments to cloud his judgment. He already knew he was up on his scorecards. What did he do? He tried to survive it. Not only that, he continued to fight on with perseverance and with stoicism in understanding where he was at in that fight. So that remains to be seen with Alexander Usyk and Tyson Fury, if one of them rock each other. And I think that with those two, I think Alexander Usyk would absolutely take the route of, let's say, being stoic and keeping it methodical and technical. Now, what about Tyson Fury's particular mental mind state? I gotta tell you, this is what makes this particular video very fascinating and interesting, and I'm gonna tell you why, and I'm gonna go right into it with very detailed discussions on this particular matter at hand. Okay, so the fact that we know Tyson Fury has mental issues in terms of mental health and things of that matter, I think can play a very big factor into this fight. The problem that you have to try to guess in this equation is that, is it going to come out during this fight, or if it's not going to come out during this fight? Just getting a little parking ticket here.
Take the parking ticket. Please take the parking ticket. Please enter.
So, why that matters is because of this. I'm going to tell you, Tyson Fury is in a situation where he has to keep his head intact for this whole entire training camp if he hasn't already. And by the way, there have been reports coming out, especially on his side and his camp, saying that his dad is really concerned with the fact that he's not all up there. And that right there remains to be seen, because how is that going to translate in how he's going to go into this matchup? Is he going to go in here half-cocked? Because if he is, it's going to be a problem, because guess what? Just like war and everything that I mentioned with Alexander Usyk, you can't have your gun jam in the middle of a gunfight. And that is the metaphorical concern that I have with Tyson Fury going into this fight. In other words, he may have a great camp. Maybe all of this speculation and rumors about him is not true, and we can just leave it at that, right? However, during the fight, your mental lapse can come at any time, and that is something that I think you should be very concerned with. That is something that you should absolutely take into consideration. Why? Because take this into consideration, understanding, right? With everything that I just said, it's a possibility that Tyson Fury is going to have a great camp. But in the middle of the fight, for whatever adversity happens, even with the small inkling of, let's say, having a little lapse of mental health issues, right? Maybe something triggered him in the middle of the fight. Maybe he thought about some family issues that he has while a fight was going on. This could be very problematic. This could be very problematic because the way that Tyson Fury deals with problems is not the way that normal people deal with problems. And sometimes it can be for better or worse. It can be for the better because guess what? Guys like Tyson Fury can thrive in a training environment knowing that, well, you know what? I'm going to use this to motivate me. And then all of that is good. But then the problem after that is now you have to go home and live the rest of your life. Because what people don't understand and what people don't know is that in the fight game, what you do in the gym, the performance that you have, and what you do in the ring and the performance that you have sometimes isn't enough. Sometimes the performance that you have in your life really affects how you're going to perform, how you're going to reach that optimal state of arousal in order for you to have peak performance. This is something that Tyson Fury has to deal with. But it's not to say also that somebody like Alexander Usyk, who comes from a war-torn nation, is not going to suffer these same problems. If, in fact, I think the problems that Alexander Usyk may have that we may not know about, perhaps maybe he has a family member that has passed away in a war, you got to remember, those problems are way bigger than the superstar millionaire problems that Tyson Fury has going on. So that in and of itself could also affect him, but guess what? You don't know that. And this is what makes this fight really interesting. You don't know what kind of Alexander Usyk you're going to get. You don't know what kind of Tyson Fury you're going to get. And you don't know what kind of fight you're going to get as a result of their two very evenly matched skills, yet also contrasting attributes in terms of size, skill, reach, and weight, and body type, but also adding to the factors of their outside problems that they may face in their daily life. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope I had break down some psychological aspects of Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk, and I hope you guys share it to the world. Don't forget to tell a friend, like and subscribe, and watch the entire video if you just started watching this from this point. Take care. Be safe. I hope you guys have a great 2024. I just dropped my first video for 2024 regarding Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler. And I'm sorry, not just Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler, but also Conor McGregor, Michael Chandler, and Sean Strickland. The title is actually Sean Strickland and Conor McGregor. I urge you guys to check that out as you are checking out this second video of 2024. Inshallah.